The cameras were rolling live when Johnny Cash reached into his jacket pocket, pulled out an old letter, and said, "Johnny, I owe you something." Carson knew that letter. He recognized it immediately. The yellowed envelope, the worn edges, the way Cash held it like something precious and painful at the same time. His hands flattened on the desk. His blue cue cards forgotten. His carefully prepared questions suddenly meaningless. "Johnny," Cash said again, his voice that familiar deep rumble but softer now, almost breaking. "I need to tell you what I did 20 years ago. And I need to tell everyone watching." The Tonight Show's Studio 1 at NBC Burbank, fell into complete silence. 300 audience members stopped breathing. Doc Severinsen lowered his trumpet. Ed McMahon leaned forward in his chair, sensing something monumental about to happen. Johnny Carson, master of the quick comeback, the perfectly timed joke, the seamless transition, said nothing. He just looked at the letter in Cash's hands and waited. It was March 1986. Johnny Cash was there to promote his latest album, a comeback record after years of struggling with addiction and fading radio play. He'd been on The Tonight Show dozens of times over the past 2 decades. Always entertaining, always the legend in black, always with a story about touring or June or the old days. But tonight was different. Cash had walked onto the stage with his usual confident stride, hugged Carson, waved to the audience, settled into the orange guest chair. They'd been talking for maybe 5 minutes, small talk about the new album, a funny story about recording in Nashville, the kind of easy conversation 2 old friends could have on national television. And then Cash had stopped mid-sentence. Reached into his jacket. Pulled out that letter. Carson stopped mid-question. The entire studio froze. To understand what happened next, you need to understand what happened in 1966. Johnny Cash wasn't always the legend. In 1966, he was a mess. A brilliant, talented, self-destructive mess. He was famous, huge hits, sold-out concerts, movie offers. But he was also deep in addiction. Pills mainly. Amphetamines to stay awake, barbiturates to sleep, whatever he could get to quiet the noise in his head. His marriage to his first wife Vivian was falling apart. His record label was losing patience. His band was exhausted from trying to keep him functional on tour. He'd show up late to concerts, sometimes not at all. He'd forget lyrics mid-song. He'd disappear for days. In October 1966, Cash was arrested in El Paso for smuggling amphetamines across the Mexican border. The news made national headlines. Country music's rising star caught with pills in his guitar case. The arrest was humiliating, career-threatening, the kind of scandal that could end everything. Cash was terrified. Not just of jail time or fines, but of what it meant. Everyone would know. Everyone would see the addiction he'd been hiding. His fans. His family. The industry. 3 days after the arrest, while Cash was still in El Paso dealing with lawyers and bail, he got a phone call at his hotel. The front desk said someone from The Tonight Show was calling. Cash almost didn't take it. He assumed it was a cancellation. He'd been scheduled to appear on Carson's show the following month, a big booking that was supposed to help promote his new album. Of course they were canceling. Why would they want a drug addict on their show? But he answered anyway. "Mr. Cash?" The voice on the other end was young, probably an assistant. "Please hold for Mr. Carson." And then Johnny Carson's voice came on the line. Not a producer. Not a talent coordinator. Carson himself. "Johnny," Carson said, his voice serious but not unkind. "I heard about El Paso. How are you holding up?" Cash didn't know what to say. He'd been preparing for judgment, for rejection. Not concern. "I've been better, Johnny," Cash admitted. "I imagine you're calling to cancel my appearance." There was a pause. Then Carson said something Cash would never forget. "Actually, I'm calling to make sure you still come. You're booked for November 17th. I want you there. I want you to play your music." And I want you to know that what happened in El Paso doesn't change how I feel about your talent or your worth as a person." Cash sat on that hotel bed in El Paso and started crying. "Johnny, I don't know if that's a good idea. The network might not want. The network doesn't book my guests." Carson interrupted. "I do. And I'm booking you. You show up. You play your music. You remind America why they love Johnny Cash. Can you do that?" "I don't know if I can," Cash said honestly. "Then find out," Carson said. "November 17th. Don't make me send Ed McMahon to drag you here." Cash laughed despite himself. "Okay, Johnny. I'll be there." "Good. And Johnny? Get some help. Real help. You're too good to lose to this." The call ended. Cash sat holding the phone, staring at nothing, feeling something he hadn't felt in months: hope. He didn't get help immediately. The addiction was too strong. But Carson's call planted something. The knowledge that someone believed in him when he was at his lowest. Someone with no obligation to care had reached out across the distance and said, "You matter." Subscribe and leave a comment, because the most powerful part of this story is still ahead. Cash did appear on The Tonight Show on November 17th, 1966. He was nervous, still using, barely holding it together. But he showed up. He played "I Walk the Line" and a new song. The audience loved it. Carson treated him with warmth and respect, never mentioning the arrest, never making him feel ashamed. After the show, backstage, Cash had tried to thank Carson. "Johnny, what you did, calling me when you didn't have to." Carson had waved it off. "You're talented. Talent deserves a chance. Now go get yourself straight and make more music." Cash had nodded, too emotional to speak. He'd left the studio that night determined to somehow repay the kindness. But weeks turned into months. Months turned into years. The addiction got worse before it got better. In 1967, Cash hit rock bottom, wandering into a cave planning to die. But he didn't die. He found Jesus instead, or Jesus found him, depending on how you tell the story. He got clean. Really clean. He met June Carter. He got married. He turned his life around with a ferocity that only someone who's been to hell and back can manage. By 1968, Cash was sober and recording the legendary "At Folsom Prison" album. By 1969, he had his own TV show. By the 1970s, he was bigger than ever, clean, focused, grateful. He appeared on The Tonight Show many times over the next 2 decades. Always gracious. Always professional. But he never mentioned that phone call from 1966. Never thanked Carson publicly. Carried the debt silently, privately, wondering how to ever repay someone for saving your life with a 5-minute phone call. Backstage, he made a choice no producer would have ever allowed. Now it was March 1986. 20 years later. Cash sitting in the orange guest chair, that old letter in his hands, looking at Johnny Carson across the desk. "I need to tell you what I did," Cash said, his voice steadier now, committed to the confession. "After you called me in 1966, after you told me I was still booked for your show despite the arrest, I wrote you a letter." He held up the yellowed envelope. "I wrote it that night in my hotel room in El Paso. I told you what your call meant. I told you that you'd given me hope when I had none. I told you I would repay your kindness somehow someday." Carson's expression was unreadable. The cameras stayed locked on both men. "But I never sent it," Cash continued. "I was too ashamed. Too proud. I thought I'd wait until I got clean. Until I could prove to you that your faith wasn't wasted. I'd send it then." He paused, looking down at the letter. "But I didn't get clean for another year. And by then it felt too late. Too much time had passed. So I kept the letter. Carried it with me. Every tour. Every show. Every time I thought about using again, I'd look at this letter and remember someone believed in me when I was at my worst. The audience was completely silent. Some were crying. Ed McMahon had tears streaming down his face. "Johnny," Cash said, looking directly at Carson now, his voice breaking. "I owe you my life. That phone call in 1966. You'll never know what it meant. You saved me. Not all at once, but you started something. You planted hope. And I never thanked you properly." He extended the letter across the space between them. "So I'm thanking you now. In front of everyone. 20 years late, but I'm thanking you." But this was the moment no one in the studio, nor anyone at home, ever saw coming. Johnny Carson stood up. In 24 years of hosting The Tonight Show, he almost never left his desk during an interview. It wasn't done. The desk was the anchor, the boundary, the professional distance that made the show work. But Carson stood up, walked around his desk, and sat on the edge facing Cash. He took the letter from Cash's trembling hands. "Johnny," Carson said quietly, "you don't owe me anything. What I did was basic human decency. You were struggling and I had a platform to help. That's all." "It wasn't all," Cash insisted. "You didn't have to call. Most people wouldn't have. They would have canceled and moved on." Carson opened the letter carefully, respectfully. The paper crinkled. The studio was so quiet you could hear it. He read silently for a long moment, his jaw tight, his eyes glistening. When he looked up, Johnny Carson, who almost never showed vulnerability on camera, had tears running down his face. "I had no idea," Carson said, his voice thick. I just made a phone call. I didn't know it meant this much." "It meant everything," Cash said simply. Carson folded the letter carefully and handed it back. "Keep this. It's yours. But I want you to know something, and I want everyone watching to hear this." He turned to address the audience and the cameras. 20 years ago, I made a phone call to Johnny Cash when he was going through the worst time of his life. It took me 5 minutes. 5 minutes to tell someone I believed in them. And apparently those 5 minutes mattered. His voice grew stronger. How many of us have 5 minutes? How many of us see someone struggling and think someone else will help them, or it's not my place, or what difference could I make? He looked back at Cash. This man just told me I saved his life with a phone call. I didn't even remember making it. It was just being decent. Being human. Recognizing talent and pain and saying I see you. The audience erupted. Not polite applause. Thunderous, standing, emotional applause. People were sobbing. Doc Severinsen was wiping his eyes. Ed McMahon had his head in his hands. Carson pulled Cash into an embrace. Two legends, two men named Johnny, holding each other on live television while America watched. When they finally separated, Carson said, "You repaid me years ago by getting clean and making beautiful music. But if it helps to hear it, you're welcome. And I'm proud of you." Cash nodded, unable to speak. Share and subscribe. Make sure this story is never forgotten. After the commercial break, they finished the interview talking about second chances and the power of believing in people at their lowest. The planned jokes and promotional talking points never happened. America got something better, two men being honest about what saves us. When the show ended, Carson kept the letter overnight. He had it professionally preserved and returned it to Cash the next day with a note. "Keep this. But know that you don't owe me anything. You paid it forward every time you helped someone else." Johnny Cash carried that letter until he died in 2003. It was found in his wallet. On the back, in his handwriting, were the words, 5 minutes of kindness. 20 years of hope. Share and subscribe. Make sure this story is never forgotten. Johnny Carson never spoke about that phone call publicly until Cash brought it up. He'd made hundreds of similar calls over his career. To struggling performers, to people in crisis, to anyone who needed someone to believe in them. In his final Tonight Show episode in 1992, Carson said, "If I've learned anything, it's that small kindnesses echo forever. You never know which 5 minutes will save a life. The letter is now in the Country Music Hall of Fame. Beside it, a plaque reads, "To Johnny's. 1 phone call. 20 years of gratitude."